The pleasure in inviting Dr. Ajay Bakshi for the opening address. Dr. Ajay Bakshi is an experienced healthcare professional and has played diverse roles as a practicing neurosurgeon in India, stem cell scientist in the US, and management consultant globally with McKinsey over the last 2 decades. He has profound experience in healthcare with strong leadership skills and passion for innovation. He has been leading Max Healthcare as CEO and MD since November 2011, and during this period, the Max Healthcare family has grown to over 7,000 employees and 4 new hospitals have been launched successfully. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dr. Ajay Bakshi.
So I wish I had an opportunity to listen to what Anil was saying, but as I entered, he was saying something very interesting. The first sentence I heard you say was that the real problem of strategy, lies within. So which is very good segue for me, because what I thought I'll do today is quite different from what you might have heard in most strategy discussions. I'll take you on a journey which goes around the world, inside the brain, and then back into your company. And I hope that leads you to some interesting insights of how the field of strategy is going beyond the boardroom, and it's relevant for us as individuals, it's relevant for us as companies, it's relevant for us as NGOs. No matter what we do, it's very helpful to understand what's happening inside our head, because that's where it all starts. So if you're okay, then I'll just dive right in. And it's just around 18-19 slides, so you shouldn't think it's going to be a 1-hour lecture. I'll probably try to speak for around 20-25 minutes, and then we can have some open question and answers after that. Yeah? So, I will see if this works. Yeah. So this gentleman is quite familiar to you, and I won't talk much about Michael Porter and his very famous paper in 1996 about what is strategy. And I've read the students' presentation and the very nice paper that you've written. So I understand that this is actually very familiar ground for you, so I won't spend too much time. But just to anchor it, you need to do something different. Most important for me is you need to make choices. You need to make trade-offs. And a lot of strategy is about making those choices. And finally, of course, you need to make sure that every choice you make fits well together, and we can have a much longer discussion about that. But if you believe this to be true, a simpler way to think about strategy is that you have to make these 2 decisions. What is it that you want to do, and how you are going to do that? That's very, very, very simple definition of what strategy formulation is all about. And what I'm going to talk about today is more about this part, the what to do. I'm saying that the how is also a very interesting story, and there's a lot of stuff that goes behind effective execution, but that's not the theme of my discussion today. I'm going to talk more about the what, and how do we choose the what, and how do we choose the what not to do. I think that's also equally important. So let me take you on a journey first. Christopher Columbus, 1600 something, made a decision. He wanted to go and search for India. There was a trade route that used to go through Turkey and through the Ottoman Empire, but the Ottoman Empire had fallen. So the Europeans were having a lot of difficulties in getting spices from India and China. And there was a market out there. There was a market for a better, faster route to get to India. Now, contrary to popular thought that he was a very brave man because he thought that he sailed to the edge of the planet, it was not really. The smart people of those times did not believe that the earth was flat. It was a very traditional Christian belief that in an old world that earth was flat, but the people who were educated used to read Greek philosophers, used to read Ptolemy, and there was a lot of astronomy that had already developed, which had even predicted the size of the earth, the circumference of the earth. So it's not, the question in his mind was not, should I go to the edge of the earth and fall off? The question in his mind was, how do I go there? And if you look at the way he reached the decision, it's very interesting that he missed estimated the distance to Japan. So from Canary Islands to Japan, he thought that it's going to be around 3,700 kilometers, but actually he was wrong. It's around 19,000 kilometers. But he had something going for him. In one of his earlier sails, he had learned that there are winds which carry you. If you are going south of the equator, you get hold of the easterlies. These winds blow from the east and take you faster. And he had also learned through some other sailors that if you are north of the equator, there are westerly winds which will carry you. So with that knowledge, he felt much more comfortable about going into an open ocean where not many people had gone before him and come back. So I just park this in your head that how did this one gentleman make a very, very bold decision and actually a life-changing decision for the whole planet of developing a strategy to get to India. Now it so happens that he never got to India, he got to the Bahamas. It so happens that he never claimed that that was not Asia, and that's why the United States is not named after him, because he insisted that this is not a new land, this is still Asia. It also turns out that his motive was profit. He had a deal with King Ferdinand that 10% of all revenues from the new lands will go to him. So that's the goal. He was not doing it for bravery, he was not doing it for some religious purposes, he was doing it for pure business motive. So this was a business strategy. And he went around 5 kings. Finally, Ferdinand and Isabella agreed to fund him. And finally, they cheated him also. They put him in jail because they did not want to pay him those 10% revenues after they conquered Bahamas. But that's another story. But the thing is that there was a goal, and he had certain pieces of information which enabled him to make that decision. So that's the first simple story that I wanted to tell you. The second story is on the most important document that was published in the last 400 years in the history of human development and political and social development. This is the original draft of the Declaration of Independence of the United States. This was created by Thomas Jefferson. The first draft was created by Thomas Jefferson, and the single most important sentence in the history of human development is this: that all men are created equal. This is the first time in the history of human being a political document was asserting that all men are created equal. Remember that till this time there was monarchy, there were kings, and then there were aristocrats, and then there were common men. All of these people had run away from Europe to escape that monarchy and to escape the very stifling religious situation they were finding themselves in Europe. Now, I want to point your attention not to this sentence. While this sentence is the most important, I want to point your attention to a correction that Benjamin Franklin has made in the original draft. The original draft was written, we hold these truths to be, something is scratched out, and he has written self-evident. We hold these truths to be self-evident. The original words were, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. So he cut out sacred and he wrote self-evident. And that created a fundamental break between the church and the state. It's such a powerful thought that the power of this document is not coming from God. The power of this document is self-evident that all men are created equal. So this actually changed the history of human development, that you no longer derive your authority from the church, which derives its authority from the God, to rule other people. Instead, he is saying, Benjamin Franklin is saying, that it is self-evident that all men are created equal. And that's still continuing. That is, in fact, the single most competitive advantage of the society of the US, where they keep reinventing themselves on this ground. By the way, when this was written, slaves were not considered to be humans, and that's why it took them another 200 years. And this sentence was used by Martin Luther King and others in the 60s when the blacks were made equal to the whites, to say that the Constitution says this, all men are created equal. So why is it that the blacks are not treated equally by the courts and all that? And today the society has reinvented itself to bring about that equality. But the thought I want you to consider is, you are Benjamin Franklin, and how are you making these corrections on this document in June of 1776? Because on 4th of July in 1776 this document became formal and the US declared its independence from the British king. And how did he come to that decision that I want to break away from the sacred origins to a self-evident equality human being. So it's a very beautiful piece of history that I wanted to share with you. But the point relevant to today's discussion is that this was something that happened inside his brain. And how did he come to that? And that's what I want to talk to you about. Okay, one more. Yeah. So, coming back to us, we are here today to talk about corporate strategies. So, who do you think makes these corporate strategies? When you're talking about Rajesh Sood and Max Life or Tata's or Medtronic or GE, who do you think makes those strategies? Those strategies are made by human beings, people. And the people who are there are using what? They are using their brains. And a very interesting analogy exists between human beings, organisms, and organizations. Organisms are composed of cells which combine together to create functional systems like the circulatory system, like the brain, like the musculoskeletal system, and all the systems work together to become a human being or an organism. Okay? So this is Biology 101, I'm sure 8th standard, all of you would have read this. So that's not surprising. But you take this human being, put them together, and then they form a further set of subsystems which are, say, finance, sales and marketing, strategy, operations, and all of these systems combine together to form what is called an organization. Yeah? Very logical. There's nothing unbelievable about that. But I don't think we often think that actually an organization and an organism are so similar. And if you start thinking about it at a slightly deeper level, what does the circulatory system do? It pumps oxygen and blood through the whole organization. What do you think the finance system does? It pumps cash. It manages cash. It takes cash from the revenue line and gives it to the operations. What do you think the muscles do? Muscles move the body. What do you think the operations function does? It runs the factory, it runs the shop, it runs the service of the hospital, whatever that might be. So it's where the muscles, it's where the rubber hits the road. And what do you think operations need for survival? It is cash. What do you think muscles need for survival? It is blood which brings in oxygen and takes away carbon dioxide and lactic acid and all those things. So there is an enormous similarity between how organisms are constructed and how organizations are constructed. Therefore, what I want to do is try to use some lessons from how the brain and the spinal cord, which is the nervous system of the human organism, is very similar to the strategic management function of an organization, which is the brain of an organization, which is where a lot of what the human brain does for the human body, a strategic function does for an organization. So that's the parallel that I am drawing, and if anybody has an alternative view to this, I would love to explore that in the question and answer session. But this is really the framing for the next 3 or 4 slides, which will take you deeper into the brain and help you understand how does the brain of Christopher Columbus decide that I really want to go and search for India. How does the brain of Benjamin Franklin decide that I want to break the sacred tradition and make it more secular. So, let's go into how does the brain build strategies. So there are many different faculties that are needed to build a strategy. I'll go one by one and I'll go a bit slow. First is attention. Attention is an ability to focus. A whole textbook can be written about it, but a very simple way to think about attention is that it's like a spotlight. It's like a spotlight that you can throw on different parts of your conscious existence, and wherever you throw that spotlight, it comes to your awareness. It rises to your awareness. Right now, when you're sitting on that chair, there are thousands of stimuli which are hitting your brain. The temperature of the room, the light, the weight of your clothes, and so on and so forth. There are at least thousands of megabytes of data which is going into your brain, but your attention, hopefully, is focused on what I'm saying. Right? So that's a spotlight. That's a spotlight that you can choose. And there's a lot of neuroscience on how that works, and we can go into that in a separate discussion, and meditation and yoga and how that works. There is a separate system which is called emotion. Emotion is about likes, dislikes, fear or aggression. The ability to make decisions based on emotion is on one hand of the spectrum. The ability to make decisions based on facts and rational thought is the other end of the spectrum. So while we make many of our decisions emotionally, we fall in love emotionally, we get married hopefully emotionally, sometimes not so emotionally, but many times. But I am submitting that in order to make a good strategy, you need to have an ability to be objective. You need an ability to be data-based and not make a decision because I just like it that way. I want to hire this person because I like Brahmins, or I want to fire this person because I don't like working in whatever environment, right? So I think emotional regulation is also an important input into strategic formulation. Third is memory. You need to remember a lot of facts. In human decision making, first, let's talk about that. You need to remember the alphabet. You need to remember that 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. These are very basic facts, but as you get older and older, these facts become more sophisticated, they become more nuanced, and without memory, you are like that guy in Ghazni. How many of you have seen Ghazni? Right? You are existing in one instant. You have no past, you have no future, you have only your notes to read, and it's actually a very strange existence. I have had patients who have had that existence, and it's actually a very strange existence. The funny thing is, most organizations are like Ghazni. Organizations don't have memory. People in an organization have memory. But if you were to say that does Max Healthcare know how to deal with a doctor? I don't think so. What is Max Healthcare? Max Healthcare is a group of people. I probably know how to do it. My team knows how to do it. But does Max Healthcare know how to do it? And that memory is also, when you have organizational memory, that becomes a part of organizational culture. When you say that GE is a performance-based organization, now Jack Welch may come and go, Jeff Immelt may come and go, but GE will still remain GE. So I am saying that when an organization starts to develop memory, it starts to become more mature. And in fact, most organizations don't have memory. In fact, very few that I know of have deep memories. Yeah. And finally, just having memory is not enough. You also need to use those memories to change behavior. You need to remember that I did this, I launched a product in Gujarat and it did not work well, and therefore I need to change something in that product before I launch it in Maharashtra or Karnataka, whatever that might be. So that's learning. That's how human beings learn. And I'll illustrate that in a few minutes on how learning happens. Now, all of this we are not going to talk about. We are going to talk about the central piece. All of these feed into decision making. Because the decision making, as I said in the beginning, is about making a choice, about making a trade-off. That should I do this or should I do that? And that needs all of this, that you need to be focusing your attention, you need to be objective, you need to remember certain facts, and you need to be able to have learned from the past to be able to make a good decision. But even then, how do we make a decision?
And by the way, this MEAL is all together like a meal.
Meal.
Like
very good. Very good catch. So now, the beauty is in the last 5 years, we actually know how these decisions are made. If I was giving this lecture in 2005, 2004, I won't be able to say. I will say something happens in the brain and suddenly we have a decision in front of us. What you are going to hear now is really science that has emerged over the last 5 years or so, stimulated by functional MRI imaging. I don't know, sometimes it stops to work.
I think to point it towards this projector.
There. Yeah, good. So, without becoming too technical, I think this is still 8th standard biology, so I feel okay to talk about it. Human brain has a lot of parts. Most of the decision making and cognitive functions, the higher mental functions, as we used to call them in neurology, happen here. So all the things that I was talking about, a lot of memory is sitting in deep inside the temporal lobe in the hippocampus, but a lot of long-term memory is in the frontal lobe. The ability to focus attention is too large a topic. I can't go into it here, but we'll talk about it separately if necessary. A lot of perception happens here and the visual cortex is over here. But more and more studies, and so these are functional MRI imaging studies. What they do, what this red spot is is when a person is making a choice, he is inside an MRI machine and more blood is flowing to a certain part of the brain. So that's this technique. This is called BOLD, blood oxygen level dependent. So blood oxygen flows to the part of the brain which is working very hard at the time of making the decision, and therefore neuroscientists can actually, it's almost like a microscope, you can go down to a neuron level to see which neurons are working when you are making certain decisions. And how are they working and whom are they talking to, where are they receiving inputs from, whom are they giving outputs to. So this science is known, and actually people have won Nobel Prizes based on this science. But what I'm just illustrating is that these are the sort of papers, this paper was published in European Journal of Neuroscience in 2012, these are the sort of papers which are actually evaluating people when they are being forced to make choices. And these are human beings. Of course, there are a lot of studies done on monkeys as well, where you actually put electrodes inside the brain and pick up signals from those neurons. But those are hard. Those are really hard experiments because you need to train a monkey, then you need to get animal approval. So that's why that science was very slow. But in the last 10 years or so, this technology of functional MRI imaging has come up, and therefore we know much more. And a lot of what we know, I will summarize in this one slide. There is a lag in this. Yeah. So before going to the main slide, I'll introduce you to three terms. And this is just a basic thing. The ability to adapt to uncertain, changing and open-ended environments is the hallmark of human intelligence. And what do you think strategy is for a corporation? A strategy for a corporation is the ability to adapt to uncertain and changing and open-ended environments. So actually, a corporate strategy is an integration of human intelligence of the entire corporation, of the entire organization. And not only the strategy maker, but a lot of people in a corporation have to combine together to create a corporate intelligence in lieu of human intelligence, which is, this is referring to one individual, but at the end of the day, a group of individuals combine together to form an organization. Yeah. The first term I want you to remember is that in the brain, in the frontal lobe, remember what I showed you? There is something called a task set. So there are like 15-20 neurons which represent a certain behavioral strategy. That if I am going to catch a ball like this, there may be like 10 different task sets. One may be like this, one may be like this, one may be like this. So there are different task sets which are encoded in the brain. And the question is, which one of those task sets wins and becomes the actor? So the second term I want you to remember is when a task set gets converted into a behavior, it is then called as the actor. Yeah, a task set that is actively being performed. So a task set is just an abstract concept. It's in the neurons. It's a choice. You can think of a task set in a corporate term as a strategic choice. But an actor is that choice having been selected and is being implemented. So that's the neural terminology. We'll come to the corporate terminology of that in a minute. And the third term that I'd like you to know is that there is something called the reliability of an actor. How well is the actor doing the task that was given to it? If it may be as simple a task as catching a ball, or it may be as complicated a task as 4 years from now I want to win an Olympic gold medal in ice skating. And then am I on track? Am I going for exercise? So the reliability of that task set which became an actor, that I want to be an ice skating champion, is being continuously monitored by other executive networks in the frontal lobe to see whether it is reaching that outcome desired. And if it is not reaching, resetting some of those actors' parameters to change, to tweak. So there is a possibility to tweak that actor to become more accurate. So I think you know where I am going with this, right? I mean, all of this sounds familiar when we talk in corporate terms, but as a neuroscientist, what's really amazing is that we now know how this works in the human brain, right? So if you are okay with these three terms, that we need a task set, we need a set of task sets. We need a whole range of task sets. One of them becomes an actor, and once an actor is acting, then its reliability is being monitored. So now this is the most important slide in the whole document. How do we make decisions? The first thing is to have a goal. It's not on this set, but I think the first thing is to have a goal, to have an objective. Because once you have an objective, which is decided by the most polar part of the frontal lobe, the photo that I showed, the most anterior, the most in front part of the frontal lobe is where goal setting happens. And that's why that's also the most evolved part of the human brain. In fact, goal-directed behavior is truly unique to human intelligence. Yes, monkeys can do it. Yes, in a very mechanical way, dogs can do it, cats can do it. But the intelligence of a dog or a cat exists over the next few minutes. Where am I going to get my food? Where am I going to go for a walk? But a human being can set a goal 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Christopher Columbus set a goal which was not going to get to him. It took him 7 years to get funding for that shipping voyage that he wanted. But he had that goal. He wanted to make the 10% profits, right? So that goal setting is the first piece. Once the goal is set, the brain and the frontal lobe works very hard to create these task sets. Many of them are created for memory, but sometimes they are also done just by creative thinking. Just by creative thinking. When you are, you take a whiteboard and you say we'll do an issue tree and we'll do an analysis, the brain does that. The brain does that, right? The interesting thing is, many people ask me the question, why is McKinsey always talking about 3 things? Any McKinsey slide will have 3 points. I want to make three points. Because the human computing capacity, the long-term memory and the working memory that we have cannot store more than 3 or 4 task sets. This is actually proven scientifically. There are a lot of studies that have been done. We cannot compare 5 task sets. We get lost. By the time we are on the 5th one, we have forgotten the first one. But 3 is comfortable, 4 is a stretch. If we are comparing 4 strategies, we are kind of there. But if I tell you, you know what, I want to consider 5 options, and first one, you're lost because your frontal lobe does not have the working memory to deal with that. So that's another insight that has come out in the last few years. Now, once the task sets are created, and we'll come back to what happens, the reliability of these task sets are evaluated in parallel within the brain. So they are now comparing. Another part of the brain is now comparing, okay, there are 4 ways to catch a ball, which one of them is best, right? So that reliability is continuously monitored, and at a certain stage, the most reliable task becomes the actor. Because then once it becomes the actor, what it does is it sends certain signals to the motor cortex. The motor cortex is slightly behind, and then it's just a mechanical task of implementing the act. Because there is a software, you can almost think of it that there is a software that, okay, go walk to the cafeteria and buy a sandwich, right? So that task set has become the actor, and then the walking to the cafeteria is very mechanical. You don't have to think every step of the walk, it just happens. It's subconscious, yeah? So that's the third part of selecting the task sets. Now sometimes, none of the task sets reaches something called a satisficing level, and I'll come back to this word in a minute. And what satisficing means is a very deep neuroscience term, and if some of you are computer algorithm background people, you'll know what I'm talking about. Satisficing means picking up the first alternative which meets a certain threshold, in contrast to optimizing the best. So human beings are not great optimizers. We are not geared towards comparing 4 and picking up the best. We are geared towards picking up the first which meets the threshold. And the threshold can be defined in many terms. In our past memory, whether it will be effective, whether it will solve all the tasks that the task set is supposed to solve. So sometimes when this reliability stuff, the step 3A is being carried out, none of the task sets may reach a satisficing level. Then what happens? Then you have 2 options. The brain has 2 options. One is, you know what, let's go out and explore. Let's go and talk to 5 people. Let's go and ask an expert. Let's go and rethink the creative thing. So you may say, you may start exploring, or you may go back to step 1 and say, none of these things actually, I don't think any of these things are going to solve our problem, and therefore we go back to step 1, and then you may end up in this loop again and again and again. However, and assuming for a minute that the actor is chosen, once the actor is acting and the brain is monitoring its reliability, either it tweaks those acting parameters and improves as it goes, or it continues to learn. It learns that some things are working well, and therefore I should do this again and again. So that's how learning happens. Okay, so we can come back to this slide, but I'm going to now use this to illustrate certain examples of how the brain makes these decisions. How do you catch a ball? How do you catch a ball? I have always thought about this question since I used to play cricket in Ames. Because I had just come from maths in high school. In 12th, I had done very complicated mathematics. So I used to wonder that does the brain do a cos square theta, sin square theta calculation, try to figure out the parabola, the trajectory, and then come up with the right equation? Because in 1991 or 1990, when I was doing these thoughts, none of this was known. We didn't know this, right? And it didn't sound right. I mean, I couldn't really see my frontal lobe, even in those days, doing those complicated trajectory calculations. No, brain doesn't do that. What the brain does is, first it says that, okay, here's the ball. What are the different ways in which I can create task sets to catch the ball? What are the motor programs that I can create to catch that ball? So that's the first thing that happens. The next thing that happens is, as those task sets are being selected, evaluation is going on, which one is likely to do. And remember, a lot of this evaluation is also combining the visual, because the eye is tracking the ball very closely. The eye, because if you take your eyes off the ball, you're not going to catch it. That's for sure. So that's the first lesson that any cricket coach teaches. Keep your eye on the ball. Keep your eye on the ball. Even while you're batting, keep your eye on the ball. And it's hard. That goes back to the notion of attention. If your attention is thinking, I must hit a sixer, and you try to hit hard, you'll forgotten the ball and you're clean board. But the evaluation is happening through the visual system, and what this is feeding back into is those task sets. Yeah. Then one of those task sets is selected, and this guy, these muscles, there is a biceps muscle, there is a triceps muscle. The biceps has to contract, the triceps has to relax, the hands have to open. So there is a very complicated instruction set that has to go down, right? It's very complicated, but it's all automatic. By automatic, we mean it's subconscious. It doesn't mean that the muscle knows what to do. The muscle still has to be told. Muscle is dumb. But somewhere in the brain, in the premotor cortex that I was talking about, that program is activated that move your hands smoothly in this. And by the way, this task set is being tweaked in millisecond time frame, to reach this ball. And learning happens. Now those of you who have read Malcolm Gladwell will remember that if you have done 10,000 hours of certain activity, you become a real expert. So that's the beauty of this slide, that this guy must have practiced since he was a 12-year-old kid or a 10-year-old kid how to catch a ball. And that's why in a flash of a slow motion TV, he can almost do it subconsciously. But really, what's happening, if you deconstruct that cat, he's done this a few hundreds of thousands of times, and therefore that task set which is likely to work, the balance of the body, the speed with which he throws himself, the evaluation of the eye is happening in nanoseconds almost, right? That's how the whole system is working. And that's what an expert is. And the really important point I want to leave here is that sometimes you don't really have to be very smart. You just have to do things, and you have to learn. You have to do things and you have to learn. If you just go out and do things and not learn, which by the way many companies do, because as I said, companies don't have memory. If you don't have memory, you don't have learning. You may have the smartest guys in the room, like who was that guy? Enron. The title of the book on Enron is The Smartest Guys Around the Table. They were the smartest guys. And they thought that they can fool everybody, but look what happened. Jeff Skilling is sitting in jail. Right? So the smartness is just one part of it. Sometimes just activating this circuit of do, learn, do, improve, learn is enough to make you more effective. It doesn't matter. And I think this is one problem of the Indian culture. where we place so high an importance on intelligence that we sometimes forget that intelligence has to convert into effectiveness, and we place so little importance on humility and learning, because learning will only happen when you have humility. And for humility you have to understand that actually, okay, I may be smart but I am not effective, so how do I learn, right? So this is one very personal observation, that in India we say, oh, that guy is very smart, he's very intelligent. He may be the most ineffective executive, but he is very intelligent. So I think this is what is happening there. Now, sometimes the system does not work, and this is an illustration of how it goes into hang. You know this story, right? This is a famous guy, Hamlet. His father was murdered by his uncle. He knew it. He knew that his uncle has murdered his father. By the way, he was in love with his aunt, Ophelia. And his dilemma was, do I become a bad guy and kill and avenge my father's murder by killing my uncle? Or do I become a good guy and tolerate my father's murder and forgive my uncle? And none of the task sets could reach a satisfying level. I am now using the neural terminology. He had these two options, to be or not to be. And the whole play, this is the genius of Shakespeare, right, 400 years ago. He took that one dilemma and wrote a whole play around how human beings struggle with difficult decisions. And at the end of the day, it's a decision. And now that we know how the decision making happens, we can actually say that the problem in his mind was a moral one. That none of the moral choices reached a satisfying level, reached a level where he could say that, you know what, I really am angry and I want to avenge my father and I want to kill him. But then a part of his brain will say, but then you will become like your uncle. You will be as bad a guy as your uncle, because you will be murdering somebody, even though it is for revenge. And you see this theme play out again and again in many Bollywood movies and Hollywood movies, and this dilemma, this struggle of making decisions. So sometimes the beautiful algorithm that I showed you does not work. And of course, we know that many times it does not work in companies also. So that's it on the neuroscience side. Now let's see what can we learn from this and how do we apply this to a corporation. Because at the end of the day, we are here in a business school talking about the corporation. So what? I told you a lot of interesting stories, but so what? Why is this relevant? So the first question you should ask yourself, does your company even make a strategy? Is it explicit? Or has it just discovered something implicitly? And it's actually not unknown. Almost 70 to 80% of small and medium enterprises will never have thought strategy. They wouldn't have thought, okay, here is a competitive advantage, here is how I should open a grocery store in the corner of Nizamuddin's store block, right? That guy doesn't do a competitive analysis. He knows that there is a demand, he knows how to procure bread and eggs and milk, and therefore he goes into this business. But I think it's a question worth asking, as you become a larger corporation, do you have an explicit strategy or does it just happen? The most important question, no, not the most, one of the more important questions is who owns strategy? Who owns strategy? And this debate happens in many companies and many times it's not clear. The textbook answer is the CEO should own the strategy. Another answer is that the founder, promoter, the guy who has put in, $10 billion of investment, Mark Zuckerberg should own the strategy for Facebook. He goes and buys $19 billion of WhatsApp. But he's not the effective CEO. There are other people who are advising him. Should the board own the strategy? It's not very obvious. But I think it's important for clarity on who owns the strategy. As we said, a lot of information has to go in to feed your strategic choices. If you are making your strategic choices very internally, without being informed in what's happening in the external world, you are shortchanging yourself. The biggest gap that I have seen in Fortune 500 companies is there is a lot of information sitting around about competitors in the sales and marketing division, about customers in again the distributors and the sales and marketing people, about employees in HR, about the regulatory landscape in the regulatory affairs function. But none of this really reaches the strategy maker. The strategy maker has his or her own biases and his or her own emotional needs, and they make the strategy based on that. So the real question is, like in the brain, Eventually, everything reaches the frontal lobe, which is guided by the information that it is processing. It does not always happen in companies. And I noticed this in the student paper as well, that you may call these silos or siloization of corporations. The next important question to consider is who and how are the task sets being created in a corporation? Are you very insular and you pick up the first thing that comes your way and you do it? Or do you formally sit down and challenge yourself that is your thinking, are the task sets wide enough, broad enough? And this is where the creative thinking, the out-of-the-box thinking, there are whole schools of management which encourage managers to not be stuck to your familiarity and availability biases and just do what you are always known to do what you are familiar with doing. Yeah. Even if you are broad enough, sometimes you may not have an answer. Do you then go out and explore? Do you go out? I know members of parliament do this a lot. I don't think they benefit from it. They go to Brazil to study agriculture and they go to Belgium to study all those things, but that's a taxpayer money. I don't think many corporations send their strategy formulator to go and see 5 competitors and see how they're doing things, right? So I think, thank you. There's something about exploration which we can do more of. That's fine. Give it a okay. Okay, so once you have done your explorations and you're satisfied yourself that your task sets are broad enough, how are you evaluating these task sets? This is the core. How are you making the decision? Is it rational? Is it emotional? Many times it is parochial. It is turf protection. Like, I am in the consumer division and I don't think the B2B division is a good idea because consumer division is mine and I am a strong guy on the board. And therefore, I punch through the strategy that we must invest more on the consumer side. I'm just making this up. But this is such a well-known bias that a lot of corporate strategy is based on this stuff, which is not rational, which is not in the interest of the organization. It is in the interest of the individual. And this is in fact one of the biggest challenges of leadership. How do you align all these different forces? Because at the end of the day, this guy he's a human being, right? He has his own emotions and financial insecurities and all the stuff that goes inside it. You can't say, no, you shouldn't be like it. If saying you shouldn't be like it was worked, then alignment will be very easy. It doesn't work. So you have to really go under the surface and say, yes, you have a different emotional need. People will get very passionate on an emotional level. That no, we think this is a wrong idea because, this is there. Bertrand Russell said very well in one of his books that when you start getting angry, it's because reason has failed you. If you don't have logic to persuade the other, you start becoming angry. And in fact, this is one thing I see very often in our interactions in India also. If I don't agree with what Anil is saying, I'll say, you know what, you're being defensive. I'll start accusing you. And it'll go in a very different tangent. That, you are very selfish or whatever. So then the argument becomes at an emotional level rather than, Anil, here is what you said. Here are the facts that I agree with and here are the facts I actually don't agree with, and let's have a rational discussion. We don't have many rational discussions. We are a very emotional civilization. We grow up in emotional families. We have to deal with very powerful father figures or grandfather figures. Amitabh Bachchan says, "Bol diya na bas," famous movie. "Bol diya na bas." So that's it. And then the kid has to learn how to deal with this powerful father figure. Yeah. So rationality doesn't always work in an Indian family, and therefore I'm not surprised that when we come to work, we also end up being more emotional than rational. But from a neuroscience perspective, that's not necessarily the best answer for the organization. If you want a best answer for the organization, you should use emotions to connect, you should use emotions to inspire, you should use emotions to motivate. There are a lot of good uses of emotion, but emotion in decision making can sometimes lead you down an inaccurate decision. That's the only part. It's not a bad thing. When you are evaluating task sets, do you only do it theoretically, or do you throw a parachute out? Do you do some pilots and do you see whether it's working or not working, right? So that's the other important thing to. Yes. And once the actor is chosen, do you monitor? This is again a big failing. We know that monitoring doesn't happen, or monitoring is given to a PMO, performance management organization, and this way down, the CEO never talks to the PMO or the strategy head. Said, I have made the strategy, now those guys don't know how to execute, what's my fault? Great strategy, poor execution. Very common story in Indian companies, yeah. But the problem is, if you're not monitoring, you're not improving, you're not learning. Recipe for failure. Because remember, the external world is very uncertain. No matter how many tasks that you may create and no matter how many actors you may choose, if you're not monitoring, you are not learning and you're not improving. And therefore, recipe for failure. So I think that's something very important to learn. And how often does your company become a Hamlet? Just hang in indecision. Should we expand? Should we not expand? Okay, we'll think about it next board meeting. Next board meeting again. Should we expand? Should we not expand? Suddenly, 4 board meetings have gone and competition has taken over. Now let's do something about it. So that's also an inherent flaw in our thinking. And sometimes it takes a leader to say, you know what, not making a decision is also a decision. And therefore, I want all of us to realize that we are not making a decision. And we are hanging like a Hamlet, and maybe that's fine. Sometimes the outside world may be so uncertain that it's okay to say that we want to wait for some time. But I think you have to be conscious about that choice and not make it subconsciously. So in the last slide, I'll paraphrase René Descartes, who said long time ago that I think, therefore I am. I'm saying the reverse. A company should say, I am, therefore I must think. Because if I don't think, I don't build the right strategy, I don't execute, I don't monitor, and I don't learn. So with that, I'd like to bring this to an end. Thank you very much for your time.
Myself, Professor Mamlik, and my question relates to confidence. Is confidence related to the actor being selected over and over again? And is agility the ability to deploy different actors for different scenarios?
Very good. Brilliant question. Thank you for asking that. So confidence is a feeling that it has 2 components to it. One is our ability in our creative energy, in creative faculties to say that look, we will find an answer, we will create a new task set. I think that's a smaller component of confidence. The bigger component of confidence is learning. We have done this before, we know this works, we have learned that this is how this particular actor will behave, and by the way, there are 4 uncertainties. Even if those uncertainties hit us, we will manage. So I think it's a very profound question you're asking, that what is the source of our confidence. But in an organizational context, I would say that whenever you're doing change management, try to aim for some early wins, quick wins. A quick win gives you confidence that yeah, it seems to be working, things are changing. And then people galvanize towards. If after 6 months of change management, nothing has changed, things are as bad as they used to be, then people lose hope and lose confidence. So thanks for that question.
The cricketer is trying to catch. Okay, so even if the expert cricketer, there is a chance that he will drop the catch. So what is that in the neurobiology? Had his strategy gone wrong or the execution part gone wrong?
Yeah, good question. So there can be 3 reasons. It was uncatchable. The human capacity to run and extend a hand in that milliseconds available may not have been enough, and even Usain Bolt may not have been able to reach it. So there is one option, one possibility for not making the catch. The second option is that you are a beginner and your task sets are not enough. You are just clumsy. You don't know how to reach out. And the third option is that this loop got broken somewhere. You are an expert catcher. It was catchable, but either you lost your attention, got distracted, and or you were nervous and tense. When you're nervous and tense, your muscle tone increases, and therefore those muscles don't respond as well to the messages that are coming from the brain as when you were in a more relaxed mode. That's why when you see what is the greatest quality of Sachin Tendulkar, the number one greatest quality is focus. Focus, focus, focus. He can pay attention to that ball better than any other batsman over the last 3 decades. And so was Sunil Gavaskar, and so was all. And he has had the time and the effort to learn. He's played probably 30,000 hours of cricket in his career. So a wavering of attention or increased nervous tension are other factors where even an expert could sometimes not be able to execute a task that he or she is otherwise well adept at executing. Yeah, these are very good questions. Thanks. Very different from a normal startup company. You may have 100 interactions. If you are a 100-man startup company, you may have 1,000,000 interactions. So it's an exponential growth. Therefore, the challenges of communication also increase, and therefore flow of information also becomes more difficult. So that's why large corporations create business units create country units, because human beings, there is research on Facebook to say that it's very hard to have friends more than 200 to 300. You cannot keep up with more than 200, 300 friends. Many college students have more than 1,000 friends on Facebook, but those are not friends, those are just acquaintances. So I think we if you go to tribal times, a typical tribe or an army, smallest set of an army, I forget what the phrase is around 7 to 8 people. That's the coherence in it. But if you are talking about a large group, 200 to 300 people, more than that it's really hard. And many of these corporations have 150,000 people. Max Healthcare has 10,000 employees. But then they're divided into hospitals. Each hospital is around 3,000 employees or so. That's also large, and that's why we struggle sometimes to make effective strategy.
In terms of, one of the biggest challenge, as we went through your presentation, we also realized, is the ownership of the strategy. Now, in most of the companies, we believe that the direction is something which is well debated and is clear, based on whatever information and resources are available with you. But in terms of long-term success, the ownership of the strategy becomes very important. And so many times in the Indian companies, you will see, and I'll not say Indian companies, even other companies, that the management changes. The individuals change. Their vision, in a way, affects the strategic direction which was taken by the company. So what do you suggest? How do we address this kind of challenge? That is one. My second question also relates to this because, as you said, organization memory, actually that is very critical and very important. And that's the total quality management which should always be there. But at the end of the day, it comes at a cost. When you retain the memory, you got to process the data and you got to put the data for the decision making, and that there's a cost to it. Now, how do you ensure that that is taken care in a profitable business?
Perfect. So I'll address both very quickly. See, my view is that in India, there is so much opportunity that actually strategic choices are sometimes overrated. The bigger failure is in execution. Because you take any industry, you take airlines, you take hotels, you take hospitals, everywhere there is demand, people have money, they don't have good services. So unlike in the US where you have to have a really super fine strategy between Best Buy and Amazon and Kindle, you need to really figure out that niche. Or be really differentiated or have a cost focus, whatever those strategies are. In India, I think the greater failure is on execution. Therefore, I am saying that it's not okay for a board to make a strategy and tell somebody to go and execute, because it has to be one unit. The strategy creation and execution has to be one unit. So if the board is making a strategy, it also has to hold itself accountable for execution. It's very hard for somebody to execute because execution includes learning. Execution includes an ability to tweak. If you don't have an ability to tweak and your strategy is wrong, then you're going to fail. And as a business unit, you're going to die. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is to cost. So what does the brain cost in energy terms? The weight of the brain is around 2% of the total body mass. Okay, it's around 1500 grams versus 60 kilogram adult, 2% of the total body mass. The energy consumption of the brain is 20% of the total body energy. So 20% of the oxygen goes to the brain. That's what it costs in terms of managing all this information that is needed to survive. Because remember, brain is the last organ to die. Once you're brain dead, you're dead. But a heart, kidney, lung, liver, everything you can transplant. Doesn't matter. But a brain is the most precious component. So I don't know how many companies spend 20% of the resources in information management, strategic thinking and all of that. I don't think we are there. Because we don't even know how to. Despite all the SAPs and Oracles of the world, we don't know how that information sitting in an SAP system actually flows to the strategy maker and how it gets executed, and the loop is not closed. So I'm saying, as a corporation, we are, not even at a 20-30 cell organism in terms of sophistication. Human body is far more complicated than even the largest corporation on this planet.
We were talking about the catch and the focus while creating the strategy. So we have the focus when we are seeing the object, right? So we can create normally the strategy as far as we can see. So do we create the strategy for the situation where we can't see? And if yes, then how do we differentiate when not having a strategy and having a strategy for that object which we are not seeing?
Good question. So I'll answer sense of unknown unknowns or the black swans, because what you're saying is how do we deal with something that we did not know could come and hit us. The traditional way of risk management is let's identify all the risks and let's figure out how to deal with them. But the reality of the external world and the reality of human history is actually the risk which kills us is something that was not on our risk framework. Yeah. So therefore, the more current thinking on dealing with things which are the unknown unknowns is to have a more robust way of responding to that, so that you learn quickly and you survive. You sense quickly and you act quickly and you learn quickly. A company which is poor at sensing, poor at executing, meaning doing, and poor at learning from its mistakes is going to be killed by a black swan event. However, a small company like the cockroaches, when the dinosaurs were killed, cockroaches were very small, or the mammals were very small, dinosaurs got killed by these guys. They could just figure out that okay, all this plasma stuff is happening upstairs, let's go underground and we'll come back later when the radiation has gone down. So the way I think about managing the unknown is how good are we at sensing, how good are we at responding to that, and more importantly, how good are we at monitoring and improving, learning as a company, not as a human being. Because if as a company, even at my level, it will be my team, my direct reports, my executive council. How good are they at bringing to the EC's notice that look, there are 3 deaths in this hospital, something bad is happening. Before the lawsuit comes and hits us, we should go and fix it. And by the way, it has happened. It may not be death, but it may be complication, it may be more infection in an ICU, it may be things. Now I could wait for an Aam Aadmi Party guy to come and say there are too many deaths happening in an ICU, or if my sensing is good, then I know, oh, what's happening in this pediatric ICU, we go and investigate, we go and learn, we go and improve. So I think it's a very profound question of how do we deal with the unknown unknowns, and it's not okay to say we wish everything was known. It's not going to happen. The world is very unknown. The world is very unpredictable. That's the beauty of having a human intelligence which can deal with that open-ended, unpredictable environment.
Very good.
Yeah? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bakshi, for sharing your experiences and insights on strategy. We learned about the neural faculties that work to build strategies, and also about the human decision-making model via wonderful analogy of human body and organizations, and also cricket and decision-making.
Also, one important key learning for me was that people can't remember more than 3 to 4 points. So if I don't write more than 3 points in exams, teachers, please give me marks. So may I now invite Mr. Anil Sachdev to give a token of appreciation to Dr. Ajay Bakshi on behalf of the Soil family. Another round of applause, guys.